Hi everyone, and welcome to another GamePad Online interview. As you've seen already, we've been talking to different people in the games industry, as we do as part of the online experience, as a way to showcase different roles within the industry, different types of people, and provide awareness of routes into the industry for young people and aspiring video games professionals. So my name is Nigel. I am the co-founder of mayamada and the organizer of the GamePad events. And we have another professional from the games industry, Jasmine Moore, who is a writer at Frontier Developments. Jasmine, welcome.
Hello. Hi, Nigel. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. We're excited to have you, and especially as a writer, also just hearing about your sort of experience in writing for games. So I definitely want to get into that. So as always, you can follow along with the video. Let us know what you think in the stream chat. You can also talk to us after the event. We have a Discord, so if you're not there at the moment, you can join that to continue the conversation after the interview. And you can also shout at us on social media, as people tend to do. We are at mayamada on Twitter and at mayamadatees on Instagram. So we're gonna get to know Jasmine, and like I said, as a writer myself of comics, I was interested to see sort of your path into the games industry, how you kind of rooted or found a route, made a route, and particularly, and it's going to sound weird to say this, I was surprised to see a black female as a writer in video games, and I shouldn't be, but I was, and I just thought, okay, I need to reach out and get in touch with you and find out sort of your experience, your skills, and sort of the work that you do. So we're going to find out a bit about your journey. My first thing I like to start with is, did you always want to work in video games? Was that always the plan, or as someone who's written to other works, did you just fall into it? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I think my path into games was a bit strange. So I grew up in a really strict household. So there wasn't a bunch of games that I was able to play. I kind of missed out on the Pokemon, kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh, Mario, Nintendo set. I did.
Wow.
I did. I still wanted to be in it, but my parents are like, nah, you're not doing that. I miss Zelda and Ocarina of Time and a lot of things. But I kind of lucked out, and I know, I lucked out in that I got a gaming laptop as a present from my nan when I was about 9 or 10. And so after that, I was off. I was just kind of playing everything I could get my hands on. So I grew up playing a lot of weirder games, I guess, maybe, and that they weren't typically what people thought of. So I played a lot of Fate. I was obsessed with Fate for years. A lot of Frogger, a lot of Crash, a lot of platformers, and a lot of dungeon crawler RPGs were kind of my thing. So I was immediately taken by the worlds. I was immediately taken by the stories and the colors, the possibilities, the art. So I knew from probably around age 10, maybe 11, that I wanted to work in games. And I've always been writing, and that I've always been, kind of putting together little construction paper books or writing fan fiction when I got older and all that stuff. So I've always wanted to do kind of both. But like you were saying earlier, it was hard to kind of imagine that there was somebody or a team of people behind it that were writing these stories. So I always knew early, but I kind of wasn't sure how to tackle it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I've definitely heard that stories of working with young people today who are interested in games, but then are not sure what's the next step, I guess. And yeah, I can imagine even more so for you, because now we have more of an awareness of gaming narrative. With different games, but I imagine sort of years ago, writing in games was not such a focus. It was very much a focus on the mechanical. So so you mentioned you were writing other things. So what were some of the other mediums you were writing in at a young age? And can you tell us a bit more about that work?
Sure, of course. So I grew up kind of reading a lot of fantasy books and a lot of kind of sci-fi books. So what I ended up doing was I wrote like small little novellas, I guess they could be called, where I would just like doodle about like, a character that was very similar or kind of like, you borrow inspiration as a kid.
Yeah.
So I was always trying to write like my favorite authors or, write like my favorite comics writers. As I got older, probably around my teens, I started getting into comics a little bit more with like the DC New 52. And then I also got into a lot of indie comics as well. So I tried to write short form little like comics. They could probably be something akin to webtoons now. But I wrote little things like that. And then I started my first novel at 14, I think.
Wow.
And I,
you don't waste any time.
It didn't turn out great. Yeah, no, it's like, you always are like, oh, I'm going to start a book or do this big project, and you start it and then you look back at it and you're like, what was I thinking? But, that's the kind of stuff you start on early.
Never done that ever in my life.
Oh, really?
No, it always comes out perfect. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Perfect. First try. Got it. Yeah. Not even a spelling error.
No.
So yeah, I woke up at about 14 and I was like, I'm going to write a book. And I did. I started out being very pretentious and getting notebooks. I was like, no, I'm not going to type it. That's for, basic people. And then eventually I was just kind of like, oh, you know what? I need to type this. So I worked on that initial concept when I was younger, but I didn't finish the actual draft until I was about 20 or so, just about getting into uni and finishing up uni is just about when I finished the first draft on that. And it was meant to be one of a series. But, you grow up and you kind of change your ideas. So I ended up kind of jumping onto other projects. But yeah, I wrote a lot of mini comics, a lot of poetry, and a lot of kind of novel attempts as a kid.
No, that's really cool. And even though you went on to other projects, just to have the perseverance to complete or near complete a first draft over that span of time is pretty impressive.
Thank you.
And so, like, you've done a lot of writing, but I understand that you had some attempt at art as you were trying to break in the industry. Can you tell us? I guess, a key word. So, how did you find yourself on the artwork side of things?
Yeah, so I've always been into art and writing, respectively. When I was younger, like basically, I guess kind of what we were taught in school was a lot of classic painting, a lot of classic drawing, a lot of like, Renaissance, Golden Age kind of art. But I think once I started getting into comics, I realized that there were other types of art as well. Like, even watching cartoons, it never really sank in to me that I could do that too. But when I started to see things, like I was obsessed with like anime, like Code Lyoko as a kid. I watched Cowboy Bebop, a lot of like Toonami. And so I started to try and like emulate that. I quickly found out that 2D art and like concept art weren't my particular fortes. But I did get into kind of clay sculpting and kind of animation that way. I like to kind of make things move. I was introduced to like Wallace and Gromit, which we didn't have in the States till later on. So I found out so like claymation was a thing for me then. And then basically when the Autodesk software kind of dropped, I was lucky in high school to have had courses offered for 3ds Max, Mudbox, and Maya. So I jumped straight into those courses as electives and took about 2.5 years of animation, which kind of really like opened up this whole new world of like things that I could do and opened up, animation for games as an avenue of things I could pursue as well.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess you were in school in the States and then working in the UK.
Yeah, I came to the UK about 1.5 years ago, which is crazy to think about now because time flies. But yeah, I came. I lived most of my life in the States and then basically came over to work at Frontier, and now I'm kind of just freelancing and over here, and it's pretty cool, pretty amazing.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure if you came to the UK at the right time, but yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, all right. So one of the things I'm very interested in asking people, particularly someone with your background, as you said, you weren't necessarily allowed to play games at a younger age. What was the reaction from like parents or family when you at some point said, "I'm going to work in games"? What was that conversation like?
It was actually, I was lucky in that it went okay.
Okay.
I think
Good.
my mom has always, my mother has always been really like kind of, she's an artsy person too. So she did a lot of poetry and short story writing, which is probably where I got my love of the art as well. And so, you know, she always knew I was going to do something a little bit different, a little bit creative, but I don't think, you know, back when I was a kid that it like creative paths were as advertised and as accepted. But pretty much when I got to, because I've jumped around all sorts of careers, I've worked in tech recruiting, I've worked in advertising, I've worked in IT. So pretty much when she saw me hopping industry, she was like, all right, she's looking for it. And then when I told her that I was going to end up in games and that I was really aiming for, you know, narrative and I really wanted to write stories, she was 100% behind me. And she was very much like, I don't know how to tackle that, but I'm sure you can do it. So I was lucky to have their support.
Yeah, no, it always helps to have like family backing. My background is actually in engineering, so I went and got an engineering degree, worked as a software engineer, so gained that credibility before I said I'm gonna make comics and play with video games. So that's another one.
Yeah. There's so many paths in.
Yeah. So you're here now. You mentioned freelancing and working at Frontier. So I'm interested to know, like, what what are you working on at the moment, and what your day to day is. I guess particularly, you know, in the year it has been. What does that look like for you?
Okay. So I can't talk too much about the freelance stuff just yet because the projects haven't been announced and all that
secrets.
Stuff.
But, cool.
Yes, secrets. But in terms of day to day, I guess I can kind of chat about the difference between working remotely and kind of my time at Frontier, which was amazing. So really, I would find that the day to day is very collaborative. You know, I feel like there's a big difference between writing just for yourself and writing as part of a team. So I think the biggest thing that you can kind of lean on as a narrative designer and as a writer when you're working in games is going to be leveraging other teams, because there's such a difference in that you're wrapping a narrative around a mechanic, around gameplay, around an environment. And you kind of have to get an understanding of where you fit in and kind of what levers you have to pull to kind of make the most realistic and most immersive experience possible for the players. So day to day, what it looked like before COVID, you know, took over everything, was that we'd have breakouts every morning. We'd have little huddles, and basically I would sit in those for design, for audio, for AI. And we would chat about current milestones, current projects, you know, kind of tasks everybody was working on. And from there, I would kind of work with the different departments. So I was very into bugging people and going, hey, you know, just kind of getting an understanding of kind of the level flow, kind of what options the player was going to make. So for instance, if it was going to be more of a run and gun section, you know, how the player would path through the level, kind of where AI would be positioned, how they would react, what they would say, if anything. From audio, kind of what the environmental requirements were. Was there going to be a lot of reverb? Were you going to be able to kind of, would we accommodate dialogue lines? All of those kind of considerations. And once I got an understanding of that, kind of understood the brief, what I would do is I would sit down and I would write things by trigger. And by object. So if it was, let's say the player character is going to be shooting down a corridor, you know, kind of write down things when they're reloading, when they're shooting, when they're, you know, getting hit, all of those kinds of things. So I'd write by event. I would say probably 30 lines, maybe 40 lines. Sometimes you write way too many things. And I would whittle it down with audio. So we would sit down and kind of plug the draft lines into the level via TTS, so text to speech. just to get an idea of how it felt and sounded in a live test environment. So once we were happy with that, I would go ahead and whittle down what I had in a first draft script. I would run that by our principal writer and then ship it back into Level.
Wow. Okay, so yeah, you're very much involved in the other departments within the production process, it sounds. And I guess because it's, like you say, it's collaborative, it's a game, so you need to have an understanding of how your writing affects sort of the rest of the gameplay and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say that's the biggest thing that I guess sometimes people don't realize. And it's something I didn't realize coming into the industry at all. And it's something I had to learn on my first few projects before I started working at Frontier, was really understanding, how narrative fits into everything, because you could write the best story, via prose or best screenplay in the entire world. If it doesn't work with the game and the message that it's trying to convey, and what all of the other assets and the messages they're conveying, from art to audio to, environments to anything else, it's not going to really come together. So you really need to be comfortable with, kind of working with everyone, because it's one of those positions and one of those fields where you're going to get to see a little bit of everyone, which is nice.
Yeah. And I guess that's the difference between, or one of the differences between writing and writing for games.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So if you're like looking back to your younger self or young person now, what advice would you give someone wanting to get into the games industry, and maybe advice specifically for someone who wants to get into the writing side of the games industry?
Yeah, I would say, number one, you can do it. You really can. There's room for you here. And I would say the biggest things are to always challenge yourself and look for smaller projects. Because sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get really lucky and you apply for that narrative internship or that writing internship at a big studio that might have made some of your favorite games. And sometimes you get that right off the bat. And in that case, you're kind of gold. You can kind of jump wherever you want to after that, but sometimes you don't. And so for the times that you don't, I think it's really important not to really, get down on yourself or start to doubt yourself and see, ask, oh, can I do it? How can I ever get there? But it really is, kind of, I hate the word, but grinding and finding, the path less taken. So for me, when I was younger, I did a lot of indie projects. I did 3 or 4. None of them were shipped. Sometimes you were taking on way too much of a scope for the size of the team that you had. Sometimes the idea was just way out of this world. But the main takeaway from it was not to, push something out and make billions of dollars, although that is cool. It was really to get an idea of how you like narrative, how you fit into the team, kind of what you can bring to the table and what you can learn. So it really is a learning experience there. So that's my first piece of advice, is always seek out, teams. You can find them on Twitter. You can find them on Instagram. Reddit is another big place where people find them. Twitch, people are always doing a lot of indie game dev. So if it's a story-based game, sometimes you can just hop into chat and ask if you can get involved. And, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but at least you'll start to network and make connections with people who are also like-minded. And, that helps give you the confidence that you need to really believe that you can do it, not just kind of, oh, can I, can't you? You'll start to see that you actually can. The other thing I would definitely recommend is to vary your reference pool. Now, I am definitely guilty of this myself, in that I love a lot of games. I like playing mainstream games, indie games, all sorts of games, and I feel like sometimes the tendency is, because it is such a different medium, is to think, oh, if I want to work in games, I have to play all this backlog of games and that's it. And I have to understand all of this stuff. And that's not necessarily the case. I think the best advice I have for someone is to be well-read across a ton of different, mediums. So what I like to do is I like to track down some of my favorite scripts from shows, from movies. I make liner notes, not just to understand, oh, this is something I like, but why you like it, kind of what makes it so good and what really, connected with you as a viewer. And I also do a fair amount of reading whenever I can for actual novels, nonfiction books. And, I always encourage people to think outside of just sitting down and leafing through a book, because sometimes people don't like to, sit down and read a huge novel. So audiobooks work, podcasts work. Really any sort of written media, just go ahead, take the time and study it, because you'll learn so much. You really will.
Yeah. No, I agree. And even for me, writing manga comics, a lot of my reading, so similar to yours, like a lot of these are fantasy books. In fact, most of these are fantasy books. I think the scripts one is a really good point as well. That's something, to be fair, that actually I could stand to do more of that. But like looking at a script and sort of breaking it down, you really do get a different perspective on the craft of it. So that's really, really good advice. So listening to you speak and talk about your journey, it sounded like you had a plan, or at least a destination, and yeah. So what I'm also always interested in when working on plans is that they typically don't go to plan. So what was it like when you had that idea that you wanted to work in games? You had this plan, and then things didn't go to plan. Like what adjustments did you make along the way, and what did you think served you well?
Great question, because you're right. The plan did not go to plan quite a few times. So I think the biggest thing that I thought was, after my first or second kind of indie project, that I was going to be ready, and that it was like, oh, I've definitely kind of gotten to the level that I need to be at to kind of write stories for games. And so I remember I had just finished up my second project. I had, turned in all the scripts, all that stuff. And I started doing industry applications. So I applied with kind of the stuff that I had from my old projects, some prose work that I had, really just picked bits and pieces from my portfolio that I thought were, going to be relevant and resonate with the team. So I did about 30 or 40 of those applications at the time, which was difficult considering the amount of digging that I had to do to find them. So I'd say a huge challenge is finding the roles themselves, because narrative is still, games are a new medium, but narrative is even newer still to the industry, as being something that is not just, something that designers do or artists do on the side, but that is a discipline in itself.
Yeah.
So studios still call them all sorts of things. You'll get people that call them games writers, narrative designers. You'll get just plain writer, which makes it really hard when you're searching on Google, LinkedIn, Indeed, wherever you're looking. To actually find
quite difficult
the
to
roles.
to pin down what the actual role is, because like you say, it's referred to as different things, but it I guess it all comes under the same umbrella.
It does, and I would definitely say that specialty sites are your friend, and that LinkedIn is your friend in those two kind of regards, because you can kind of trawl through a little bit more. But in terms of the challenge that I found, is that I applied to all these different studios. I applied for all these narrative roles, and I got rejections for every last one, which was crushing at the time. And some included feedback, some didn't, most didn't. And so you kind of find yourself at a loss, and you're like, oh God, you get to doubting yourself. You get to being like, maybe I'm not cut out for this. And, I took my time. Yeah, I, had my little cry about it. But I kind of broke out the pity party. I was like, we're not going to do this. And what I did was I actually, it was a bit of an unconventional move. I don't know whether I recommend it to everyone, but I decided to switch, because I was making an actual day job switch as well. So I was switching out of advertising, and I was trying to look and figure out where I could go next that would give me the kind of inside scoop on being a day-to-day creative. And so what I did was I decided to jump into technical recruiting. So I ended up recruiting for Silicon Valley companies, mainly kind of like Apple, Amazon, that kind of thing, but more for designer roles, not necessarily for writing roles. But even so, I was able to gain access to a whole bunch of portfolios, a whole bunch of websites and, kind of people, and see what, I guess, top of the top looks like in their fields for how they present themselves, how they put their portfolio forward, kind of how they're speaking to the people that are in the jobs that everyone wants. And so from there, I decided to take a critical look at my current portfolio, at my current website, at the writing samples I was submitting, and I did a complete overhaul. I decided to clean up some of the prose that I was doing or had. So I cleaned that up, made it more digestible, cut it down from like 20 pages down to like 5 or 10, and used that as a portfolio piece. Wow. And then I also started taking stock of my favorite games. So at that time, I was playing Red Dead Redemption 2. I was playing a lot of Overwatch. I was playing a lot of mainly those two, I think. And I kind of took stock of those and I said, all right, now write a script based on your favorite character. Now write, kind of where can you insert a scene that would play out like a mission, that would play out like a cutscene you could see. And I did that. I spent a few months just kind of, writing, rewriting, revising. And I had a few portfolio pieces there. And then I did a few for television shows that I liked as well, on like Netflix or Hulu, and basically, sat down and made myself do that writing exercise to write fan fiction, not just in the way I usually would and would be inspired to usually, but to kind of really tailor it to what I thought the back end would look like from a team perspective. Yeah.
Right. Wow. You went in like surveillance and just like taking notes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I did. I infiltrated.
Yeah, that's the word. I was like, you infiltrate. You didn't just go and do a job. You infiltrated, got the notes, got the secrets, came back out. Okay, I like that. I like that approach. I think that's good. Obviously, it's worked for you. I think it's good for, if someone wants to do writing, but just in general, that sounds like a good approach. I'm just taking notes myself, like taking change my approach to things. So, like you talked about sort of jumping around different industries. I'm interested to know, is there anything you picked up from a different industry that you still kind of make use of in your work now?
Yes. I would say the biggest things I've learned, because originally I was in community management for IT, and then IT, like kind of technical writing. And then I moved over to community management for advertising, where I was doing like a lot of project work and a lot of like direct filmmaker work, which was really, really rewarding. I would say the biggest thing I've learned from those previous roles was really, it's going to sound strange, but empathy. Because I feel like it's something that sometimes gets lost when you're working on something that is so creative and so passionate, and you're working in one part of it, that you don't necessarily see the forest for the trees. And I think sometimes when you're talking about games, there shouldn't be, and I don't think there is all the time, but I think sometimes there's a bit of a divide between kind of product and development and then everyone else. So like QA, support. A lot of those teams sometimes might be overlooked or not included in the development process the same way that narrative would, or an artist would, an audio designer would. And I think there's a lot of room to be able to kind of reach across the table and say, hey guys, do you want to sit down with us? And I think to the best of my ability, that I try and make sure that I pull people in from all different areas, because I think it's not just, the rest of your writing team that's going to have a writing or an opinion on the writing. Maybe there's someone in QA or support or tech who also might have a good suggestion. And so I think it's just really taught me to have an awareness for how different teams play into something and really help make a whole product.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I wasn't expecting it, but I like where you went with that. I think empathy is important. I think, like, to add to that, I'd say that kind of that different perspective and diversity. I know sort of diversity tends to be spoken of in terms of sort of ethnic diversity or gender diversity, but also, you talked about working in a team, so getting different people's perspectives into the final output, because it's very easy I imagine it can be very easy to like be siloed and just do your bit, or for a team to just do your bit, and then whatever happens after that happens. But I think that's not for me anymore. Wash my hands. Yeah, exactly. So I think the more you can get that input, it can avoid a lot of problems further down the line if you just get a different person's perspective and just be open to it. So that makes a lot of sense. So I have a very leading question, and I'm going to give some context to this. But so I do work with young people. I've mentioned it so many times in these interviews and on our podcast. We do like a comic story workshop. So I work with young people in the capacity of, you know, creating their own stories, characters. So it involves writing. I work with sort of ages like 8 to 16, maybe 17. And one of the things I've noticed is, how can I put this? Maybe like a fall in the standards of spelling and grammar. So my leading question from someone who is a professional writer is how important is spelling and grammar? That's just an easy lob for you, by the way. You just go and dunk that and
just not loaded at all. I think it's important. Like, definitely get your spelling and grammar down. Please don't just ignore spelling and grammar. But also, I find that there's a hyperfixation on it sometimes. And I've experienced it, you know, in my education. I did a degree in English and with like a writing concentration and PR. And in both, you know, kind of areas, they were always like, check your punctuation, do this, do that, you know. And I think that's great to be able to give you the foundation, because you need that foundation to be able, you need to know the rules to break the rules. But there's a lot of rule breaking that happens, especially when you're writing dialogue. The rules pretty much go out the window. Onomatopoeia is a thing. Punctuation is a free for all. And there's a lot of, like I said, just kind of variation that goes on. And it's not just only dialogue and cutscenes. It's also like armor descriptions and flavor text and, you know, kind of codex things that you might have as more lore documents in universe. Those are also written in character, often to kind of emulate whoever's in the universe. And it might not be written from someone who's an English professor. From that perspective, it might be written from somebody who's more of a, you know, mechanic. So they don't necessarily talk in the same or speak in the same English that, you know, you're used to writing. And so you have to be flexible, but you should have that strong foundation. And it varies from project to project. So you'll usually get a style guide for each project that you work on, and you'll be able to kind of perform to those rules. But know your spelling and grammar, but don't obsess over it, because it definitely does vary.
No, I get that. Yeah, I get the foundation. So some people, some young people might be watching this. You know who you are. Foundations important.
Yes, please get the foundations.
Yeah. So, and looking at the industry as a whole, a lot of the reason why, you know, we do these interviews as part of GamePad is to sort of raise awareness of different roles. And you've spoken about sort of advice for people who want to get into the industry. What about the industry itself? What changes do you think can be made by companies looking for talent to be able to increase the pool of talent and include people from sort of underrepresented groups in the industry? What do you think can be done differently?
I think there's a lot of strides that have been made in the last like 10 years, I would say. And gaming, like I said before, is such a new medium. It really is. Like, you know, the last 30, 35 years, you get games really coming into society and, you know, coming into the cultural milieu in such a big way. And, you know, there wasn't always that representation or representative. Why can't I say the word? Awareness. That awareness going into it, where, you know, you might have a team of people who have, you know, produced an amazing product. And there might be someone that's represented on a cast as a minority, either culturally or, you know, gender diversity, you know, kind of LGBT but diversity, but maybe they're only written in a limited way or with a limited understanding of who that person is. So they might be comic relief, or they might be a villain, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Right. They might play more to stereotypes than it might necessarily be ideal. I think like I said, there's a lot of change that's happening in the industry, and I think it's been really cool to see, even before I started working in it in a professional capacity. You see games like Horizon, you see things like the Tomb Raider reboot, you get things like Life is Strange and what Don't Nod is doing. And you get a lot of representation, not just across gender and sexuality and all that stuff, but also just different perspectives, So I feel like that's definitely opened up. Is there still room for improvement? Of course there is. And I think that the place that improvement's really going to come from is not just from a team side of trying to be more open to it, but also the recruitment side of looking in strange places, which is kind of what I learned to do during my brief time as a recruiter, was to look in weird places that you might not always think of. So I think there's a lot of talented people that put their work on social media and might put their work on Webtoon or Tapas or Reddit or Twitter, wherever it is. There's a lot of cool writers out there, and there's a lot of writers that are doing interesting things, even for things that we might consider cringy. There really isn't cringe when it comes to games, because at the end of the day, you're writing fan fiction just differently. You're writing it for a universe that might be established or maybe not even established. Maybe you're creating the universe, but it is still fan fiction. And so I think sometimes even looking at the more popular or more well-written things on like Archive of Our Own might be great, or even like Tumblr if they want to jump into that cesspool. But I think there's a lot of great writers with a lot of interesting things to say if you just kind of broaden your horizons and broaden kind of what it means to be a good writer in gaming, because there is a lot of room.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, I think that's good advice all around. So I've got a last couple questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
What stories are you enjoying right now, gaming or otherwise?
So right now I haven't had nearly enough time to jump into gaming the way I want to.
Yeah,
but
you work in the thing and then get less time to actually play or watch the thing.
You already know. I'm like,
yeah.
Wow, that game looks so good, and I'm not going to have time to play it for the next 3 months. But games that are kind of on my list to play include, oh goodness, why is the name going out of my head? Hades.
Okay.
Hades, I want to play. Yeah. I also want to play Phoenix Rising when it drops, or unless it's already dropped, I have to check. But I want to play that as well.
Out. I think so. Definitely by the time this comes out.
Yeah, exactly what I was talking about. It's like, I think, so I want to play Phoenix Rising. I played half of The Last of Us 2, and then I just got busy. So I want to finish that game up. So yeah, those are the 3 stories I'm really excited about right now.
Cool. And then in terms of the next gen, or which is now current gen of consoles, I like to throw this question, which is potential for controversy, but PS5 or Xbox?
PS5.
Okay.
I'm a PlayStation gal. I think the first console I ever got was a secondhand PlayStation 2. So I've kind of had that allegiance. Also, I find, this is probably going to be controversial, please don't flame me, that the Xbox controllers have always like made my hands hurt. So like PlayStation controllers just are a little bit more ergonomic.
Does it fit? So. Okay, cool. Yeah. I saved that question to the end so that people can take in everything you say before they ignore you.
Nice.
So it's strategically placed. But I like, you answered that very directly. I've had different answers, all good answers, but I like you just went straight in for PS5, and I appreciate that. So, cool. All right, the very last thing is, where can people find you to see your work, projects that, when you can talk about them, will be out, let us know.
Yeah, so I'm one of those social media lurker people that I'm always on, but you probably won't find me. But you can probably find me at on Twitter. I do announce things on Twitter. So that is at Brown Girl Games, BRWNGIRL, and then game spelled normally. And then you can also find me pretty much on Twitch at the same address, Brown Girl Games. I don't stream nearly as much as I used to, but I do like to stream. I used to do games. Now I do a lot more creative stuff. So I am working on a few web comics and a few production Bibles for some stuff I just wanted to do as an indie project. So if you guys are interested in kind of seeing script work and, chatting with me and asking me questions about that stuff, you can find me there. And pretty much those are the two places you'll usually see me, if you see me.
If we do. Cool. All right, we'll make sure those links are in our show notes or video description when this goes out.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining me. It's been really good to hear about your journey and your very strategic approach to getting into the games industry. I think many people will enjoy and take a lot from that.
Thank you. Hopefully it didn't sound too much like the art of war, but I find it's such a rewarding industry.
Yeah.
If you find a way in, however you find a way in, there's room for you, and it's growing so fast. So go ahead and jump in if it looks like it'll be your thing.
Yeah, and if you haven't read The Art of War, you might want to do that just so you can follow Jasmine in her path, because that is also on your bookshelf somewhere. But thank you to everyone for watching. This is one in a series of videos we do talking to professionals in the games industry just to raise awareness of roots in and different types of people and roles that do exist. As always, you can send us your feedback in the comments. You can also jump in our Discord, and you're welcome to ask any more questions and things in there. We have a podcast. I always make sure to remember that, where if you have enjoyed the sound of my voice for an extended period of time, but feel you just need a bit more, we have our Story X Story podcast, where myself and GamePad host Tazzy talk about stories across pop culture, as well as do creator interviews, just different deep dives into different types of stories. So you can find that at mayamada.com/storyxstory. Our GamePad event can be found at gamepad.events, and our email address is gamepad@mayamada.com. And always welcome to send us your feedback. Other than that, stay tuned, because we'll have more interviews coming up, more activities, and more discussions like these. So until next time, take care and stay safe, everyone.
Bye.
Hey there, I'm Nigel from mayamada. Thanks for watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other great videos we have on the channel. You can also join the GamePad Discord and check out the next event at gamepad.events. We'll see you soon.